welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing 44 of my top Easter and spring DIYs that I've done so far here on my channel. Since this is a combination of a bunch of the DIYs put into one, they are going to be labeled a little bit out of order, so just keep that in mind while you're watching. I do have a brand new spring and Easter DIYs coming very soon, so if you're not subscribed already, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on those future videos. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. Now let's go ahead and jump right into it. First up is DIY number 1. For this project, I'm using this square unfinished wood piece, and this one did come from Michael's. The first thing I'm doing is painting all of the outside edges with my matte acrylic paint from Folk Art in the color Italian Sage, and then I also painted the entire backside this same color. I did not paint the front side because I'm going to be adding a piece of cardstock to that side. For the cardstock that I'm using, it's this really pretty one here. It is from Hobby Lobby and it's from the Paper Studio brand. It did come in a sampler paper pack. Now I'm just placing the block onto the paper and tracing around it so I know where I need to cut. And I did end up cutting it a little bit larger than the block so that I was able to sand the edges off later on. Next, I'm using a paintbrush to apply my Mod Podge onto the front side of my block. Once I have a good amount of that on, I'm just placing my piece of paper on and then making sure that there's no bubbles underneath. Once it dried down a little bit, I used some sandpaper to sand around all of the edges and take away the excess paper that was hanging over the sides. I love doing it this way because it does just give me a nice crisp edge. I did end up having to go back through and touch up the paint around the sides since I did sand a little bit of that paint away. I decided to use a second piece of cardstock, which is this cream color one here, and I cut it down just a little bit smaller than the flower cardstock because I'm going to be layering it over top. I'm also going to be using one of these stamps from Dollar Tree. These are so beautiful, but I ended up going with the bird that you can see me cutting out here. So I just cut that out so it was a little bit easier for me to use individually. And then I just used my black ink and pressed the stamp right onto the ink to make sure that there's ink on it. And then I was very careful when pressing this down onto my cardstock. I made sure that it was centered and then just very, very slowly pressed it down so that it didn't have any smudging. I was also very slow when removing my stamp to prevent any smudging, and I just love the vintage look of this. Next, I ended up adding a second wood piece, this square one here. This one is a little bit thinner, and as you can see here, I'm applying some Mod Podge with a paintbrush, and then I got really lucky because my piece of cardstock that I did my bird stamp on ended up being the exact same size, and that's exactly what I needed. So here I'm just applying that piece of cardstock to my piece of wood, and then I'm using some hot glue to attach that piece of wood right in the center of my wood block. I did this because I wanted to have the bird look a little bit more raised off of the wood block. To add some detail, I'm using this tan and cream color ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and I'm cutting it to the length of the top wood piece, and I cut 2 strips of that ribbon. Then I wanted to have the 2 seams on the side cut off, so here I'm doing that. And then once those are cut off, I'm then cutting my strip of ribbon in half so that I'll have 2 different strips. I'm doing the exact same thing to the second strip that I had originally cut so that all together I'll have 4 small strips of this ribbon. Now I'm going to be using some hot glue to attach all 4 strips of ribbon around all 4 sides of my top wood piece, right over top of the cream color cardstock. And then once I have those all attached, I am going to be using these gold, gold tacks, and these ones I believe are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just going to be pressing those in all of the corners of the top wood piece. Once I have all 4 of the tacks in, this piece is complete. This is what it looks like all finished. I think it turned out so cute and it was really easy to do. Next is DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using one of these unfinished wood rounds from Hobby Lobby. You can get these in a pack. And the first thing I'm doing is painting the entire surface with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I'm going to be using 5 of these unfinished wood potted flowers, and these I got in a pack at Dollar Tree. I'm going to be painting the stem and leaves of all 5 of them with the Spanish moss colored chalk paint from Folk Art. And then as you'll notice, I'm leaving the pots on these completely bare because I'm going to be covering those up later on. For the flowers, I thought it would be cute to do a few different colors. So for 2 of them, I'm using the color Wild Rose. Then for just one of the flowers, I'm using the color Glacier. And then for the final 2 flowers, I'm doing the color Yellow Ochre, and they are all from the brand Folk Art. For this project, I'm also going to be using 5 of these unfinished wood pots. These ones also came in a pack at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut for all 5 of these flower pots. I'm going to be adding these over top of the other ones that are attached to flowers just to give a little bit more of a popped look so that the flowers look like they're actually sitting inside of the pots. On my sign, I wanted to say hello spring, so I'm going to be using this unfinished wood word cutout that says hello, and this one is from Joann Fabrics. And then to spell out the word spring, I'm using these wood letters, and these ones are from Hobby Lobby. For the word hello, I'm going to be painting that with the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Sage. And then for all of the letters to spell out the word spring, I'm painting those with the color Wild Rose. After I had everything all painted and the paint was dry, I started attaching everything to my wood round. I did the hello word in the top left-hand side, and then I did the word spring in the middle with the flowers right underneath. I did leave a space on the top right-hand side open because I'm going to be adding some details to that spot later on. As you can see, all of the pots are plain, and then this is where I'm adding all of the pots that I stained right over top of them, just so that it sticks out a little bit and it looks like the flowers are actually inside of the pot. I just thought that this looked a little bit better than just the plain pots with the flowers on them. Next, I'm using this yellow and cream color striped ribbon from Hobby Lobby to create my double bow. I am going to be making it a little bit larger, and I just used my 4 fingers on my hand to give me a good size. And then once I have this double bow created, I am going to be making a second double bow. I'm then going to be making a smaller double bow with this ribbon here from Hobby Lobby. I wrapped it around my 2 fingers twice, and then taking the end of it and poking it through the hole in between my 2 fingers at the bottom. I'm pulling that through, and then that piece I'm taking up and over my 2 fingers and then looping it through the little loop at the bottom and then pulling it tight. I hope that explains how to do the double bow. That's the best way I could describe it, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of a tutorial, and that's exactly the same way I did the bigger bow as well. For the ends of the bow, I wanted it to be a V shape, so I just cut those into the V shape, and then I'm going to be hot gluing the striped ribbon down first in the top right hand side of the sign, and then the smaller bow right over top of the striped one. For the very last step, I'm going to be creating a hanger with 2 strands of jute, and then I'm just using some hot glue to attach the hanger along the back side of my sign. This is the sign all finished. It's a cute, colorful sign, perfect for spring, and it was really easy and affordable to create. Now for DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be using one of these small wood rounds, and this came from Hobby Lobby, and I believe they come in a pack of 4. And I'm just going to be painting the entire thing with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I'm also going to be using 2 of these unfinished wood mini candlesticks from Hobby Lobby. These also come in a pack of 4, and I'm painting them with that same ivory colored chalk paint. After the paint has all dried, I'm then going to be using some hot glue on the tops of both candlesticks to glue the tops together. And then I'm going to be using some more hot glue to attach the bottom of one of the candlesticks to the center of the wood round. I'm then going to be using this tin bucket. This did come from Hobby Lobby, and I'm hot gluing that right on the top of the bottom of the candlestick. I'm then adding some of this floral foam from Dollar Tree right in the center of my bucket. And then to fill the bucket, I'm going to be making a little succulent garden, and I'm using these mini succulents from Hobby Lobby. And I'm also going to be using some of these longer succulents, also from Hobby Lobby. And I ended up mixing in some other succulents that I just had in my craft stash as well. But I just used some pliers to cut the succulents down so that they were a little bit easier to work with. And then once I would have them cut down, I would just start placing them inside of the floral foam. And I started with these smaller ones first, and I placed those in the center. And then around all of those mini succulents, I decided to hot glue some of this reindeer moss from Dollar Tree. And then after I had the reindeer moss in, then I was able to start just working with some of the longer succulents and then succulents that I had in my craft stash. And I just started hot gluing them around wherever I think that they were gonna look good. And I did end up cutting some of the longer succulents down quite a bit so that they weren't hanging super low around the bucket. Once I had the succulents in, I decided I wanted to give the wood on this piece a little bit of distressing. So I used some of the color Maui Sand, and I just dry brushed it on all of the wood to finish off the project. And this is what it looks like all finished. I absolutely love this project. It would be perfect for spring and also for summer, and it would go perfect on a tabletop or a tiered tray. Moving into DIY number 4, for this one I'm going to be using one of these small canvases from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is using one of my utility knives to cut the canvas off of the frame. And I'm just doing this very slowly and carefully so that I don't cut myself. Once I have all of the canvas scored around the staples, I just started pulling the canvas off, and I really wasn't too worried if I tore the canvas because I'm not going to be using it for this project. I'm also going to be using some of this chicken wire that came in a roll. I believe this is from Hobby Lobby a couple years ago, and it's the perfect size to fit right along the back side of my frame. So here I just measured it out to the length that I needed, and then I just used my pliers to cut down the chicken wire. For the frame, I wanted it to be a really light color, so I'm painting it with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. I'm then attaching the chicken wire along the back side of the frame, and I'm using my staple gun to attach it. Next, I'm going to be using one of these bottles from Dollar Tree, and I'm just removing the cork that's in the top of the bottle because I do not need it for this project. And then I'm going to be using some of this burlap that I had in my craft stash, and I am going to be a little bit off frame for this, so I'm sorry about that, but I just measured the burlap fabric to fit around the bottom 3/4 of my bottle, and then once I had the burlap cut down to size, I hot glued it around my bottle. After I had the burlap attached, I did want to add a little bit of color, so I'm just attaching this green and white checked ribbon right around the center of where I attached the burlap, and then just use some hot glue to secure it into place. I'm then adding some of this thin white rope around the center of the checked ribbon, and then I use some hot glue to hold that into place along the back side. And then I'm going to be taking those 2 pieces of rope that I have, and I'm just going to be placing those through the chicken wire, and then I'm also going to be bringing them back up and through the front of the chicken wire again. And this is just going to hold that bottle into place. But then once I have the 2 pieces of rope wrapped back through to the front side, I'm then going to be tying the rope in the center at the very top of where the burlap is on the bottle. And like I said, this is just going to hold the bottle into place so that it doesn't move around. Of course, I needed to add some florals, so I'm using some of these dainty pink ones that are from Michaels. And then I also wanted to add a stand for this piece, so I'm going to be using this scrap piece of wood that I had in my craft stash, and it's about 4 inches in length, and I'm painting that with the same ivory colored paint. Once the paint was all dry, I'm then going to be hot gluing the frame right to the center of this scrap wood piece. And because I like to pretty much distress everything, I'm adding some of the Maui sand color from Folk Art, and I'm just dry brushing that around the entire ivory colored parts on this piece. This is the piece all finished. What I love about this one is it's a little bit different, but it's still super cute and perfect for spring. Next is the 5th and final DIY for today. For this one, I'm going to be using this grapevine wreath that I picked up from a Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm doing, obviously, is taking the tag and the hanger portion of the wreath off. I'm then going to be using this cream color fabric that I also picked up from Dollar Tree. And I'm just going to be folding it along the top side a little bit so that there's not any frayed edges on the fabric. And then I'm going to be flipping my wreath over and just wrapping the fabric pretty much around the bottom portion of my wreath. Now, I'm not really sure what I was thinking when I was creating this project, but there's probably a way better way to do this than the way that I'm doing it, but I'm going to show you guys how I did it anyway. So I basically just hot glued the fabric around the bottom half of the wreath, just using hot glue in random places as I was folding the fabric over. Not really sure why I did it this way, but I did. So I'm sure you've had projects that you've done where you go back and you're not sure what you were thinking when you made it. This is the project. I'm really not sure. So anyway, you can see here, I just keep folding over and using more hot glue, folding over, using more hot glue. I did leave a little bit of a pocket though, so that I'm able to fit some florals inside of that pocket so that you'll be able to see them along the front side. I'm then going to add some of this green and cream color ribbon along the very top of that fabric that I just added. And once again, I'm using some more hot glue along the back side. Pretty sure there's a better way to do this, but hot glue seemed to be the correct way while I was doing this. I then added a little bit of hot glue underneath that ribbon on the front just to make sure that it stayed in place. And then the next thing I did, I think I lost the clip, but I'll just let you know that I did add some of this lace ribbon from Dollar Tree along the very top of that striped ribbon and then along the very bottom edge of that ribbon as well, just to give it a little bit more of a dainty look. Then for the florals that I'm using, these tulips are from Michaels and they're from the Ashland brand. I ended up just cutting each stem of the tulip down so that I could work with each stem individually. I then placed each tulip stem inside of that fabric pocket that I had created earlier. And then for the very last step in this project, I ended up just adding a jute hanger to the very top of the wreath. This is what the wreath looks like all finished. I think it ended up turning out okay. The backside, however, is not the best looking, but they all can't be winners, right? For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using this jar that I recently picked up from Dollar Tree, and I've already removed the lid because I'm not going to be using it for this project. Then I'm using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I'm painting the entire jar, and I did have to do a few different coats. Then once that was all dry, I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Espresso, and I'm dry brushing that on the entire jar. And as you can see here, it's really making all of those lines on the jar pop. Then for the inside of the jar, I'm going to be using 3 of these really beautiful pink tulips that I just recently picked up from Joann Fabrics. They were originally $1.99 a piece, but I did get them half off at $1 a piece. And I'm also going to be using some of these stems that I already had in my craft stash. I believe those ones are from Michaels. So I'm just placing in the tulips first, and then I'm placing all of the other flowers around the tulips. And then for the very last finishing touch, I'm just wrapping some jute twine around the top of the jar and tying a bow on the front. And this is what it looks like all finished, a really easy, simple, affordable project for this spring. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this small mini chalkboard from Dollar Tree. I thought this was super cute and I had never seen it before, so I think it's a new item at Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm doing is just using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut to stain all of the wood on this piece. I just used a paintbrush to apply the stain and then I wiped away the excess. I'm also going to be using 2 of these small scrap pieces of wood. They are 4 inches by 1/2 inch, and these did come in a pack of scrap wood from Hobby Lobby. And I'm using that same walnut wood tint to stain both of these pieces. I'm then going to be using this piece of cardstock. This did come in a paper cardstock pack from Hobby Lobby, and it's from the Paper Studio brand. So here I'm just placing the cardstock over top of the chalkboard portion of the sign and just tracing that out, and then I'm going to be cutting that down to size. It doesn't have to be perfect because I am going to be gluing the wood pieces over top of this paper. Next, I'm applying some glue from my glue stick on the back side of my paper. I'm then applying the paper right over top of the chalkboard portion of my sign. Then I thought it would be really cute to add some of this rope trim around the entire inside portion of the sign around the edges. So here I'm just doing that, and to attach the rope I'm using hot glue. Again, I did that around all of the edges except for the bottom because that's where I'm going to be attaching the other pieces of wood. Then I'm going to be hot gluing those 2 smaller wood pieces together. I'm then using hot glue to attach these 2 pieces at the very bottom of the cardstock right on the front of my sign. And now this is going to give me the appearance of a little flower box. The flowers that I'm going to be using in my flower box are these pink and purple mini flowers, and these ones are from Michaels. But before I start attaching my flowers, I am going to hot glue some of this reindeer moss from Dollar Tree right on the very top wood piece just to give me some greenery before I start adding my flowers. I did cut the flowers off of their stems. I cut them so that they were just one single flower because it was a little bit easier for me to attach them this way. So I just used some hot glue on the stem of each flower, and then I just placed it inside of that reindeer moss. And I switched it up. I had no real order that I was doing them. I would do a couple pink ones and then a couple purple ones, just kind of wherever I thought that they would look good. And I did attach the flowers along the entire flower box that I have. Then I'm going to be using this mini welcome word cutout, and this I believe came in like a set from the Target dollar spot, but I am not 100% on that. And I'm just painting it with my folk art matte acrylic paint in the color Vintage Rose. And then I'm using some hot glue to attach that welcome word right in the center of my sign. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. This one is so adorable. It is the perfect size for a tiered tray, and it was super easy and affordable to create. Next is DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using this sign that I got on clearance from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting the entire inside portion with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I did a few coats of that just to get all of those words on the sign covered up. Then for the frame of the sign, I'm painting that with my Castle colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and again, I did a few coats of that paint as well. For the inside of the sign, I'm going to be using these 3 unfinished wood tulips, and these are from Joann Fabrics this year. They were on sale and I paid about $1 a piece for them, and they were in the Easter section of things at the store. I'm going to be painting the stems of them with the folk art paint in the color Spanish Moss, and then for all of the flower parts of the tulips, I'm painting them with the Wild Rose color from folk art. Once the paint was dry, I thought it would be cute to add a little bit of dimension to the flowers. So in all of the places that have the slits in the wood, I took some of my ivory color from Waverly and just painted that over top of the slits just to give each flower a little bit of a dimension, and I really liked the way that that looked. Before I attach my tulips, I did want to add some distressing to the front of my sign. So I'm using the same color that I used when painting the frame, Castle from Folk Art, and I'm just dry brushing that over top of all of the ivory. Then I did want to add a little bit more detail, so I'm taking some jute twine and I'm hot gluing that around all of the inside edges of my frame. And then for the very last step in this project, I'm using hot glue on the back side of all 3 of my tulips and attaching them to the front of my sign. And here is my tulip sign all finished. I think this one turned out super cute. It's really simple and was really easy to do. And not to mention, it's another affordable project that's perfect for spring. Moving right into DIY number 4. For this one, I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood rectangle pieces from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is using my go-to folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. I'm using a paintbrush to apply the stain or wood tint onto all of the edges of the sign, and then just using a piece of paper towel to wipe away the excess. I'm then painting the inside of the frame with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. In this project, I'm also going to be using this unfinished wood wildflower cutout. This did come in a pack of flower cutouts from Joann Fabrics. I believe it came with like a box that you can make with it as well, but it was a better deal for me to get the entire kit with the flowers than to buy them separately, so that's why I'm using one from the kit. As you can see, I painted the stems of the flowers with my folk art paint in the color Spanish Moss. Then for the inside of the flowers, I'm using a folk art paint color called Vintage Tea Rose. And then for all of the outside portions of the flowers, I'm using the color Wild Rose from folk art. And the final step to this project is hot gluing my flowers right in the center of my frame. This is what the piece looks like all finished. I love the simplicity of it. Again, another really affordable project. It only cost me a couple dollars to create this, and I've seen similar pieces like this in retail stores for a lot more than just a couple dollars. Now for the 5th and final DIY today, I'm starting with one of these wood planks from Hobby Lobby. This is 48 inches by 9 1/8. It was a little bit awkward to try to film the whole thing, but you can see it's just a big wood plank board, and I'm going to be making a wood leaner sign, if you haven't already guessed. The first thing I'm going to be doing is using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. No surprise there, it's my favorite. I'm using a paintbrush to apply the wood tint and then just wiping away the excess, and I did this to the entire board, the front, the sides, and the back. In this project, I'm going to be using this Hello Woodward cutout. I believe this one is from Hobby Lobby, but I'm not 100%. This was just in my craft stash, so I've had it for a while. I'm painting it with the Waverly paint in the color Ivory. And then I'm also using these letters that spell out the word spring. I did just recently get these from Michaels, and they were on clearance for 99 cents a piece. At first, I thought it would be really cute to paint every single letter a different bright color for spring, and then I really didn't like the way that it looked once I had everything put together, so you'll see here in a second I am going to be changing it. So once I have all of the letters painted and the paint's all dry, I started just placing everything onto my wood plank just to make sure that it's centered before I start attaching each one of my letters. Then to attach the letters, I just placed hot glue on the back side of each one of them and then just placed them back down into place. But then, like I said, after I had everything all put together, I really didn't like the way that it looked. So what I ended up with doing was going back through and painting all of the letters with my ivory colored chalk paint, and then I decided I wanted to add some flowers and butterflies around all of my letters. To get my butterfly and all of my flowers, I am going to be using the ones off of this stencil that I got from Amazon, and I will have it linked down in the description box if you guys are interested. But I just thought the flowers on this were really cute and they were a good size to use, so I ended up just placing the flowers pretty much like randomly on my sign where I wanted them to be, and then I stenciled the stems in the Spanish moss color from Folk Art, and then all of the flowers I stenciled with the wild rose color from Folk Art. And then for all of the butterflies that I ended up using, I did them in the color Vintage Tea Rose, also from Folk Art. And like I had said, there's no specific order when I was doing the butterflies and flowers. I just randomly would stencil them on my wood plank wherever I thought that they would look good. Here is the spring porch sign all finished. I did have to take a picture of it indoors because our weather here in Michigan has been a little crazy, but I can't wait to display this out on my porch come springtime. This was way more affordable to create myself than if I were to go and purchase one already done in stores. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be starting with this framed piece from Dollar Tree. I am only going to be using the frame portion, so I'm just going to be popping out the back butterfly picture of it. It was really easy. I just used my thumbs to press it out. Then I'm going to be painting the entire frame of this piece with a Folk Art acrylic matte paint in the color Maui Sand, and it's just like a really dark gray. And I did do the front and back of this piece so that it looks completely finished. And then once that was all dry, I did want to add a little bit of distressing to this, so I took some of my ivory colored chalk paint from Waverly and I really messily painted this around all of the edges, and then whatever was left over on my brush, I just dry brushed that over the entire piece to give it a rustic, distressed look. Next, I'm going to be using this scrap piece of wood, and it is 7.5 inches by 1 inch, and I'm painting the entire piece with my ivory colored paint. Since I want this entire piece that I'm creating to be kind of distressed looking, I'm taking that same Maui Sand color that I used earlier, and I'm using that to distress this piece of wood. And I'm just dry brushing the color pretty much wherever I think it would look nice, mainly around all of the edges, and then just taking whatever was left over in the middle. For the flower pots that I'm going to be using, it's going to be these ones from Dollar Tree. I am using 2 different packs of them, so there will be 6 of them total. There'll be 2 larger pots and then 4 smaller ones, and I'm painting each one of the pots with my ivory colored paint. I wanted to have the words flower and shop on my piece, so I'm using these unfinished wood letters, and these ones I believe are from Michaels. I'm painting each one of the letters with my Folk Art matte acrylic paint in the color Vintage Tea Rose. I'm then placing the letters on my piece of wood, just getting them all centered and spaced out the way I want them to be before I use hot glue to attach each one of the letters. It was then time to start putting everything together. I'm going to be having the flower pots on the bottom of my frame, so I just placed those where I wanted them to be, got them spaced out the way I wanted, and then I started hot gluing each one of the pots down. I then used hot glue on the top wood piece that says Flower Shop, and then I attached that to the very top of my frame. I thought it would be really cute if I added some Spanish moss on the inside of each one of my flower pots. So here I'm just hot gluing some of that Spanish moss in the pots. It can look a little messy, but once I had the Spanish moss all glued in, I did take some scissors and trim it up just a little bit so that it looked a little bit more put together. For the flowers that I'm using in my pots, it's these really tiny pink ones. These ones are from Michaels, but you can get flowers like this at pretty much any craft store. So I'm just cutting them down so that they're a little bit easier to work with to place in each one of my pots. And then I'm using some hot glue to attach all of the flowers in each pot. Here is the piece all finished, a really easy and affordable project for spring, and you can even use this one in your summer decor as well. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm starting with this unfinished wood round, and this one is from Hobby Lobby. I usually get these in a pack of, I believe, 5, and I'm using a paintbrush to apply my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. Once I had a good amount applied, I would then use a paper towel to wipe away the excess. Then I'm going to be using this unfinished wood word cutout that says welcome. This one is from Joann Fabrics, and I'm painting it with my ivory colored chalk paint from Waverly. I'm then using hot glue on the back side of the word cutout to attach it right in the center of my wood round. I thought it would be really pretty to add a pop of color with these paper flowers, and these ones are either from Hobby Lobby or Michaels. And then I'm also going to be adding some greenery pieces that I had in my craft stash. This is a good way to use any extra pieces that you might have laying around. And I first started by hot gluing some of the greenery pieces on the top left-hand side of my sign. And then once I had a couple different ones of the greenery attached, I then started attaching my flowers and then just kind of worked with it. I added different greenery pieces and different flowers. I did end up just using the rose flowers, and I went with the dark pink, a white, and then a lighter pink color. You can see here that I added one of these like daisy flowers, but I ended up pulling that one off and just sticking with the roses. After I had all of my flowers and greenery attached, I then needed to add a hanger, and for the hanger I'm just using 2 strands of jute and I'm hot gluing them along the back side of my sign. Here's the sign all finished, a really simple and easy piece that's great for spring and can be transitioned into summertime as well. Now moving into DIY number 3. For this project, I'm going to be starting with one of these unfinished wooden crates from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm going to be doing to it is just painting the entire thing with my ivory colored paint. I'm also going to be using 4 of these wooden beads, but these beads are flat on both sides. And I believe these ones are from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to be using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut to stain all 4 of the beads. I would just apply the stain with a paintbrush and then wipe away the excess with a paper towel. I'm using 4 of these wooden strips. The longer ones I have cut down to 6.5 inches, and the shorter ones I have cut down to 5.5 inches. And as you can see on all 4 of the strips, on one side I have them cut at a 90 degrees. And I'm painting all of the strips with my ivory colored paint. I'm using one of these wood planks from Dollar Tree, which you'll see later on that I ended up needing 2 of these wood planks, but I'm staining it with my walnut wood tint from Folk Art. And then once I have that stain, I set that aside and I'm gonna start assembling my wooden crate. I'm attaching all of the wood strips that I painted on the inside of my wooden crate using some hot glue. I attached the 2 longer ones on the back side of the crate, and then the 2 shorter pieces I attached on the front portion of my wood crate. As I said before, I ended up adding a second wood plank piece from Dollar Tree, and I ended up cutting the first one down to 5 inches in length, and then obviously I cut the second piece down to 5 inches as well, and then I stained that the same color because this is going to be my roof. And then once those were stained, I just added some scrap pieces of wood along the backside to attach both of the wood plank pieces together. Then it was time to add the wood plank pieces to the tops of all of my wood strips, and I did that just using some hot glue and then just making sure that the wood plank was centered. I then added the wood beads that I stained on the very bottom of my crate using some hot glue. Then to add some detail, I'm going to be using some of this green and cream color ribbon from Hobby Lobby. And I'm a little bit out of the shot here, but I'm just cutting it down a little bit so that it's thinner for me to work with. And then once I have a good strip of it cut out, I'm then going to be cutting the ribbon into small little triangle pieces to create a banner to go along the front of my wood crate. Next, I'm attaching a strand of jute along the front of my wood crate, kind of in like a swag, and I'm just using hot glue to attach it. And this is gonna be the base for my banner that I'm creating. So once I have the jute all added, I'm then going back and hot gluing my little triangle pieces that I cut out along the banner, and I am leaving a little bit of space in between each one of the triangle pieces, and I ended up using 6 total. Now it's time to fill the crate, and I'm using some Spanish moss from Dollar Tree. And then once I have that added, I'm going to be adding my flowers, and I'm using some little white ones that I had in my craft stash. These ones are from Hobby Lobby. I did cut them down a little bit so they would fit really nicely inside of the crate. And then I'm using some of these small pink ones, and these ones are from Joann Fabrics that I picked up last year. So I just added the pink ones in between the white ones, and then along the back of the crate, I just added some extra greenery pieces. This is the piece all finished. I think it turned out so cute, and it's the perfect accent piece to add to your spring decor this year. Moving into DIY number 4, for this one I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wooden birdhouses from Michaels. And originally I wanted to use my walnut wood tint to stain the roof, but then I realized that some of the wood didn't look very good where you could see like some of the glue where it was put together. So I decided to just paint over that, and the color that I'm using for the roof is called Castle by Folk Art, and it is a chalk paint. And then I also painted the base of the birdhouse that same color. I then painted all of the main parts of the house with the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Sage, and I did only have to do 1 coat of this paint. And then for the trim around the windows, I used my ivory colored paint from Waverly, and then I also painted the door that same ivory color. For all of the steps and then the rails going up the steps, I thought it would look really nice if I painted them black, so that is what I'm doing here. And I did use a smaller paintbrush so that I wouldn't get any of that black paint onto the ivory color paint. And then once I had that all painted, I decided to paint the doorknob that same black color. I then have these 2 little scrap pieces of wood, and I'm going to use these as window boxes to go underneath the windows on the birdhouse, and I thought it would be good to keep with that black accent color, so I'm just painting those black. I then thought it would be really cute to add these 2 wooden flower pots to my birdhouse. These ones are from Hobby Lobby, but you can get similar ones right now at Dollar Tree. I'm painting both of the pots with the ivory colored paint. Then once that paint was dry, I used some hot glue to add in some Spanish moss to both pots. And then for the flowers that I'm going to be using, they're these really pretty bright pink ones, and these are from Michaels. I cut 3 little flowers for each pot, and then I just hot glued all 3 flowers into my pot. I then thought it would be really cute to add a string of jute around each one of my pots, so that's what I'm doing here. I just tied the jute around and knotted it in the front and cut off the long pieces, and again I did that to both pots. I then used hot glue to attach both of my pots to the front of my house right next to the stairs. Then it was time to add my window boxes. As you can see here, I'm using hot glue to attach both of the boxes under both windows. Once I have those attached, I use some hot glue to attach some Spanish moss to the top of my boxes. And then Inside of the Spanish moss, I thought it would be really cute to add some more flowers, but instead of using the really bright pink ones, I went for ones that were a little bit lighter in pink because I thought the two different tones would be really cute. So here I'm just cutting the flowers down individually so that they're easier for me to work with, and I'm just hot gluing 3 of those little flowers on each one of my window boxes. I had this long pole block scrap piece of wood in my stash, and I thought it would be so cute to add the birdhouse to it. And it is 8.5 inches long, and I wanted it to be the same color as the base and the roof of the house, so I'm painting it with the castle colored paint. And then I'm also going to be using this square wood block piece. This one is from Michaels, and you can get it for 99 cents, and I'm painting that with that same castle color. It was then time to attach everything together. So as you can see, I'm using hot glue to attach the pole right in the center of my square block piece. But then to make sure that it stayed in place, I'm using a wood screw and then just screwing those 2 pieces together and then hot gluing my birdhouse on the top of the pole. This is the piece all finished. This really did not take long at all, and I think it turned out great. But what I really love about this one is it gives you the idea of doing a pedestal birdhouse, but you can do the house in any kind of color and use any flowers that you want to really make it your own. Now moving into the last and final DIY today for DIY number 5. I'm first starting with this block piece from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting the entire piece with my ivory colored paint. I'm also going to be using these 3 unfinished wood tulip picks from Dollar Tree, and for 2 of them I wanted them to be a little bit shorter, and since the wood stem on these is really thin, I was able to just wiggle them back and forth and break it off instead of cutting it. And then for the 2 shorter ones, I'm painting both of those tulips with this pink color, and then for the longer tulip, I'm painting that with a yellow color. Then for the stems for all 3 of my flowers, I'm using the color Spanish Moss by Folk Art. And then once the paint has all dried, I thought it would be really cute to add some detail around all of the edges of the tulip. So I'm taking my ivory colored paint from Waverly, and I'm just very lightly painting around all of the edges of all 3 of my tulips. Next, I'm using my drill to drill 3 different holes into my wooden block. I did one in the center towards the back of the block so that I'm able to place my wooden stem pick inside of that hole. And then for the other 2, I drilled on each side of the wood block more towards the front. Then to make sure that each one of the stems stayed secure inside of the hole, I put some hot glue in the hole and then placed the stem in the hole. Of course, I was going to add something to the front of my block, so here I'm just spelling out the word tulips with these little wooden blocks from Hobby Lobby. I made sure that they were centered on the front of my block and then just hot glued each one of them down. Then for the last step, I added a piece of jute to the back of my block, and then I wrapped it a couple times in a few different directions above the word tulip and then also below the word tulip, and then I just secured that jute piece along the back side once I had enough along the front. And this is the piece all finished. It's the perfect tabletop or tiered tray piece for this spring. For the first DIY today, I'm making a fabric stuffed bunny, and the first thing that I did was I went to Google and I just typed in bunny silhouette. This is one of them that came up, and then I printed it out. Once it was printed, I then used my scissors to cut the silhouette out. The fabric that I'm going to be using for my bunnies is this really pretty blue fabric with flowers on it. I did just recently pick this up from Hobby Lobby, and as you can see, I did double it up so that there was 2 layers of the fabric. That way I can get 2 bunnies out of one cut. I then placed my bunny on top of my fabric, and then I traced all around it so that I am able to see the lines where I need to cut out the bunny on my fabric. You could always use like sewing pins to hold both of those pieces of fabric together, but I just cut it out very carefully and made sure to hold them so that my bunnies were exactly the same when I cut them out. Now that I have both of the bunnies cut out of the fabric, I'm then going to be gluing them together. Obviously, I want to put glue on the inside where it's the faded color of the fabric, and then the very vibrant color of the fabric is going to be on the outside. So I took my hot glue gun and I ran the hot glue around the very edges of the bunny, and I did work in small sections when doing this just so that I could make sure that everything was in line and I didn't accidentally glue something together that didn't need to be glued together. I always like working in sections when hot gluing fabric. So I just continued to hot glue all of my bunny fabric together, but I did not glue the very bottom by the bunny's feet together because I'm going to need this to be open for when I add my polyfill. Next, I'm going to be adding my polyfill to the inside of my bunny. You can get polyfill at any craft store, and even places like Walmart sell it. I took small pieces of the polyfill and pressed it up into the bunny with my fingers, and then I did end up using a small dowel rod to really press that polyfill up into the ears of the bunny. And then I just continued putting the polyfill into the bunny until it was stuffed pretty well, and then the very bottom of my bunny, I just used some hot glue to glue the bottom together. Then I wanted to add some detail around my bunny, so I did use a piece of polka dot ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and then I'm adding a piece of jute right in the center of that ribbon to add even more detail. You'll see here that my ribbon already is cut into a V shape on the ends. That's because I originally had already attached this ribbon and then decided I wanted to add the jute, so I'd already done that previously. But I just wrapped those two pieces around the bunny's neck and had them overlapping on the very front. Once I had it all glued together, I did end up wanting to use some buttons. The buttons I'm using are from Dollar Tree, and I'm using like a little bit larger of a brown one, and then I'm using a really small gray one, and I glued the small gray one onto the brown one, and then I just hot glued those right in the center of that ribbon where they overlap on the front of my bunny. For this project, I'm also adding this Happy Easter unfinished wood icon that is from Hobby Lobby, and I painted it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. And then for the last step in this project, I'm hot gluing that wood icon right underneath the buttons on my bunny. And this is what my fabric stuffed bunny looks like all finished. I ended up doing a second bunny as well with a little bit of a different silhouette, but it's basically the same steps as I did with the first bunny, and I think they look so cute together. Now moving into the second DIY today. For this one, I'm going to be using an entire pack of wood shims that I picked up from Lowe's. There are 8 of them in a pack, and as you'll see here, these wood shims are tapered, so they're a little bit larger on one side, and then they taper down a little bit thinner all the way down to the second side. The first thing I'm doing to these wood shims is I'm painting all of them with my Waverly paint in the color Pumpkin, and I only did 1 coat of this paint on all of my shims, and I did do the front and the back side of them. Once they were all dry, I then took some of my Java colored paint from Folk Art, and I just dry brushed that color around all of the edges of all of my wood shims. I'm then attaching all of my shims together using hot glue. I would put the glue going all the way down one of the shims and then just press another one on top to attach them. And I did glue them together where all of the larger sides are glued together and all of the smaller tapered sides are glued together. So it would be kind of like in the shape of a carrot. Next, I'm going to be using some of this green raffia from Dollar Tree, and I did leave the little tie that was in the middle holding the raffia together. I thought it would make it a little bit easier for me when I glue it onto the top of my shims. I did cut the top of the raffia down quite a bit so that it would be a little bit shorter, and then with my scissors, I did not want to have just like one big blunt cut on the top of the raffia, so I did take my scissors and just kind of cut randomly so that it looked a little bit more choppy and more realistic. Then to glue it on, I just put hot glue right on the top of my wood shims and then attached the raffia to that. I'm also adding some of these greenery pieces that I had in my stash, and I'm just ripping them apart basically so that they are individual and a little bit easier for me to add on. I like doing it this way. That way I can place each little stem exactly where I want. And I'm just using hot glue to attach those right in front of that green raffia. And then to add even more detail, I'm adding a little bit of Spanish moss from Dollar Tree right around all of the greenery pieces. For this project, I'm also adding one of these Happy Easter wooden icons from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting that with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. I'm adding this green and cream color ribbon. I thought this color goes perfect with today's project. I tied it into a really simple shoelace bow, and then I'm adding that at the very top of my wood carrot, and then right underneath that bow I'm adding that Happy Easter icon. And this is what my wood shim carrot looks like all finished. A really easy and inexpensive project that's perfect for tabletop decor this Easter. Now moving right on into DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using this square wooden wall piece from Michaels. This is from the Art Minds brand. And the first thing I did was just peeled off the tag that was on the back of this piece. And then I used my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut. I painted the tint on around all of the front edges first, and then I wiped away the excess tint with an old towel. And then I moved on to the sides of the piece, and then I also did the back as well so that the whole entire piece will look finished, even though I'm not really going to be doing anything to the back. Then for the entire inside of this piece, I'm painting it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I just had to do one quick coat of this paint. For this project, I'm using 8 of these unfinished wood carrot icons from Hobby Lobby. I'm painting the bottom carrot portion of these with my Waverly paint in the color Pumpkin. And then for the top of all of my carrots, I'm using the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Spanish Moss. After all the paint had dried, I'm then placing all of my carrots inside of my wood sign. I wanted to get them all spaced out the way I wanted them to be before I started gluing all of them down. And then to glue them down, I'm just using hot glue on the back side of each carrot and then just pressing it down back into place. Then to add just a little bit of color, I'm using some of this green and cream ribbon from Hobby Lobby, tying it into a really simple bow, and then I'm adding that bow at the top left-hand corner of my sign. This is what it looks like all finished. This project only took me a few minutes to create, and I think it looks so cute for tabletop decor this Easter. Now for the fourth and final DIY today. For this one, I'm using this unfinished wooden carrot from Dollar Tree. And the first thing that I'm doing to this is painting the bottom carrot portion of this piece with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Pumpkin. And I only had to do one coat of paint for this. Then for the top portion where it sticks out a little bit, I'm painting this with my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Spanish Moss. And then for the outside of the stem, I'm using Folk Art chalk paint in the color Sage Shadow. And the color Sage Shadow is a little bit thinner than the other paint, so I did have to do 2 coats of that paint. Then I'm using these unfinished wooden letters to spell out the word Easter. These ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting all of my letters with the Waverly paint in the color Ivory. Next, I'm taking all of my letters and just spelling out the word Easter, going all the way down my carrot, just making sure they're all centered before I start gluing them down. And I did use hot glue on the back side of each one of my letters to attach them. After I had all of my letters attached, then I wanted to add a little bit of detail around the outside of my carrot. So I'm using some of this white cotton cord from Hobby Lobby, and I just hot glued that going around all of the outside edges, but I only did around the outside edges of the bottom of the carrot. I did not do around the stem of the carrot. Then once I got all the way back around, I just clipped the cotton cord off, and then I hot glued the end of that down so that it wouldn't fray out. And then I wanted to add even more detail. As you guys know, I love adding detail to a lot of my projects. So for this, I just took some regular jute and just hot glued that around all of the outside edges of my carrot, right on the outside of where I just added that white cotton cord. Then I'm going to be adding that jute around the inside of that white cotton cord, but I noticed that my E was a little bit crooked, so I peeled that off, and before I hot glued that back on, I just went ahead and added the jute around all of the inside of that white cotton cord. And then once I had that attached, I had to glue my E back on. I did break my E when I was trying to get it off, but once I had it all glued on, you couldn't even tell. Next, I'm going to be making a double bow, and for this one, I'm using this green and orange checked ribbon, both from Hobby Lobby, and I took the pieces of ribbon and I wrapped them around my index and my middle finger twice. Then I took the two end pieces and then I poked them through the opening that's at the very bottom of like where my hand and my two fingers meet. I then took those two pieces of ribbon and then I brought them up and over in between my two fingers, and then that little loop that's down at the bottom, I put both of those ends of the ribbon through there and then just pulled them up and super tight. I hope I explained that well. I tried to explain that in another video and it's super hard to explain how to do bows, so I hope that explained everything okay for if you don't know how to do a double bow. Next, I'm adding some Spanish moss to the very top of my carrot where the carrot meets the stem. I used hot glue to attach that, and then I'm also adding some of this green raffia from Dollar Tree. I just took some leftover pieces that I had from a previous project, and then I cut the pieces down pretty short, and then I'm just hot gluing those at the very top of where I just added the Spanish moss, and I added that going all the way across the top of my stem. Then I'm adding some hot glue to attach my double bow at the very top left-hand side of my carrot. And then for the very last step, I'm adding some jute through the top holes of the carrot to create my hanger. This is what my project looks like all finished. I love the rustic look of this one and it goes perfect in my home this year with all of my Easter decor. For the first DIY in today's video, I'm going to be using this unfinished wooden bunny that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. It was in the Easter crafting section and I paid $3.99 for it. The first thing I did was just peeled off the large tag that was on the bunny, and then I painted the bunny with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I only had to do one coat of this paint. Once that was all dry, then I took some of my Java colored paint from Folk Art and I very lightly painted this color around all of the edges of the bunny to give it a little bit more detail. And then once I did that, I took whatever was left over on my brush and just very lightly dry brushed that around all of the sides of the bunny, and then also along the front and back sides of the bunny. And I did just stay going in vertical motions so that all of my distressing lines would be in the same direction. Now that I have my bunny all painted, I'm going to be adding some of this green and cream color checked ribbon that I just recently picked up from Joann Fabrics. I'm just wrapping it around the bunny's neck and tying a very simple shoelace bow. Then I wanted my bunny to look like it has a headband, so I took some hot glue and I drew a line with the glue right where the bunny's ears meet the top of its head, and then over the glue I added some Spanish moss. It was really messy, so I just used my scissors to trim that up a little bit, and then over top of the moss I knew I wanted to add some really tiny flowers, and I have these pink ones that I just picked up from Joann Fabrics, and I thought they would be perfect because of their size, so I just cut them down really small in pretty much like individual pieces, and then I used hot glue to attach each one of the little flowers separately. I did also add some green stems that came from just some random flowers that I had in my craft stash because I wanted the pink flowers to have what looked like green stems. So for these ones, I did the same thing, just cut really small pieces and then added them around the pink flowers with some hot glue. And I continued to do these same steps until I had the flowers and the green pieces all the way across the Spanish moss that I had added. Next up, I'm using this really cute Happy Easter stencil that I recently picked up from Amazon. It did come in a pack with a bunch of different Easter stencils. I will have those linked down in the description box in case you are interested. I took the stencil and just centered it on the bottom portion of my bunny, and then I used painter's tape around all four sides of the stencil to hold it into place. Then for the words Happy Easter, I use the Folk Art Matte Acrylic Paint in the color Wild Rose. This is the first time I've ever used the acrylic matte paints from Folk Art, and so far I've really been loving them, and they have so many more color selections than just their chalk paints. Then for the little detail that was around the words Happy Easter, I ended up using the acrylic matte paint from Folk Art once again, but this time the color is in Italian Sage. When the paint was all dry, I then removed all of the painter's tape and my stencil. Next, I'm taking this scrap piece of wood that I had in my stash, and this one is 7 1/4 inch by 1 1/2 inch, and I'm brushing on my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut. I'm brushing it on in sections and then wiping away the excess wood tint. I do like to use a smaller brush when doing this because it gets in all of the little grooves of the wood just a little bit better. After the stain was dry, I then used hot glue on the bottom of my bunny and attached it to the center of my piece of wood. And this is what my tabletop bunny piece looks like all finished. I love how this one turned out. It was really super easy to create and it has such a high-end look to it. I'm just really happy with how this one turned out. Now moving right along into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this wreath from Dollar Tree. They pretty much have these year-round at Dollar Tree, so you can get it at any time. And I'm taking my Waverly paint in the color Ivory, and I'm just randomly painting this color on the entire wreath. I still wanted some of the original wreath color to pop through so that my piece looked more vintage and distressed. If you didn't want to paint it with a brush, you could always spray paint it and it would be really easy to do it that way. Once all of my paint was dry, I started collecting all of the flowers I'm using for this wreath, and these two are from Dollar Tree. They're both roses, and I'm using a cream color and then also that peachy pink color, which I love so much. I just cut a few of the roses off of their stems, and then I'm also going to be using some of these flowers that I believe are from Hobby Lobby. I'm not really sure what these are called, but I thought they were really cute to add around the other roses. So I just cut a few of those off, and then I started adding some Spanish moss to the very bottom of what's going to be my wreath. I just used hot glue right on the wreath and then pushed the Spanish moss on top of that to hold it into place. Then I added my cream color rose over top of that Spanish moss, and I attached it with hot glue once again, and I kind of pushed the stem that was left over on the flower into the little pieces in between the wreath on the bottom so that it would stay in place. And I ended up just adding a bunch of random flowers that I found in my stash too. I had some lamb's ear stems, so I added that around the cream color rose, and then the little white flowers that you can see me adding here, those are from Hobby Lobby, and I use those in tons of my crafts. I really love those. They are perfect for so many different projects. And you can see that I'm just adding random flowers, kind of like where I just think that they look nice, and that was how I went with this wreath. I didn't really have it planned. I just knew which color scheme I wanted to use, so I was just adding the Spanish moss and then adding the flowers where I thought they would look good. And I pretty much just used hot glue to attach everything today. So once I had all of my roses and all of my little flowers attached to the bottom part of my wreath, I then went and added some of these little like mini eggs. And these ones are from Hobby Lobby as well. And again, I just used the hot glue to attach them. And I just placed one in between each one of my roses. Next, I'm creating a double bow using this ribbon from Joann Fabrics. Don't mind the paint all over my fingers, but I wrapped the ribbon around my index and my middle finger twice. Then I took the end of that ribbon and pressed it through the hole that was at the very bottom V of my fingers and my hand. And then I pulled the end of that ribbon up and over my two fingers, and then if you can see this little loop here over by my middle finger, I then took that ribbon and put it through that bottom loop and then pulled the end of that ribbon very tight. I hope that explained it well. This one was a little bit hard to explain, but you can kind of watch how I'm doing it as well if you're not sure how to do a double bow. I'm also using this green and cream color ribbon, also from Joann Fabrics, and for this one I'm just creating a really simple shoelace bow, and then for the ends of all of my ribbons I'm just cutting those into a V. Then I'm using some hot glue to attach the green bow first on the left-hand side of the top of my wreath, and then over the green and cream ribbon, I'm just adding the double bow. And then for the very last step, I'm adding a jute hanger to the very top of my wreath. And this is what the wreath looks like all finished. I'm really loving all of the colors on this. It looks so high end, and I can't believe that I used a lot of materials from Dollar Tree to create this one. Now moving into DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using this Let's Go small sign from Hobby Lobby. I recently picked this up in the clearance section for $1.49. I always love getting these little signs on clearance because they are perfect to redo. The first thing I'm doing to this one is painting it with my Folk Art acrylic matte paint in the color Italian Sage. Since this paint is a little bit more sheer, I did have to do 3 different coats of it to get everything all covered up. Then once it was dry, I took some of my Waverly paint in Ivory and I went around all of the edges of this sign to give it kind of a distressed look. I just thought it added a little bit more detail, and I just randomly painted it on. So some places have more paint than others, but I really love the way that this looked. Then I'm going to be using these 2 little bunny gnome stencils. These came from the same pack of stencils as the Happy Easter one I used earlier on in the video. And I wanted to make sure that I had all of my little bunnies spaced out exactly right. So I did cut the stencils down on the sides a little bit just so I could see visually a little bit better to space them out. For the center, I am going to be using the bunny that has the hat that's sticking straight up. So I just made sure that the stencil was centered in the middle of my piece here, and then I used my Waverly paint in the color Ivory to stencil him on. And then for the next stencil that I'm going to be using on the left side, you'll see that I have it with his hat going to the left, and I'm using the same color Ivory to stencil him on. And then when I want to do the stencil that I'm using here on the other side, I'm just flipping the stencil over so his hat is then pointing to like the right side. And then again, same color, the Ivory color from Waverly. I did the whole thing, just these 2 colors. Next, I'm taking these wooden letter beads and I'm stringing them onto a piece of jute to spell out the word Easter. Once I have them all strung on, I'm then putting this piece right over top of all 3 of my gnomes and then wrapping the ends of the pieces of jute on the inside of my wood piece, and then just using some hot glue to attach them into place. Then to add just a little pop of color, I'm using these pink flowers from Joann Fabrics once again. I'm cutting off just a couple of the flowers individually, and then I'm hot gluing them at the very top of the sign, like on each side, right over top of the jute. And to me, this just added such a cute little touch, and I'm really glad that I added this pop of color. And here is my Easter tabletop bunny gnome picture all finished. This one is super cute, another really easy project that only took me a few minutes to create. Moving right along into the 4th and final DIY today. For this one, I'm using this block of wood. This is 3 1/4 by 2 inches, and this came from Hobby Lobby. It came in just like a pack of random wood. And I'm first starting out by painting it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I did 1 coat of this paint. Then once the paint was dry, I'm using this cute little bunny stencil that also came from that pack of stencils that I recently got from Amazon. Again, I'll have them linked down in the description box. I'm just centering the stencil on my wood block, and then I'm using some painter's tape at the top and bottom to hold it into place. Then I'm using my matte Folk Art acrylic paint in the color Wild Rose to paint on my bunny. And then once the paint was all dry, I then removed the stencil. And then I thought that this piece just needed a little bit of detail, so I took some of my Java colored chalk paint and I just painted that color around all of the edges of my wood block. And then what was left over on my paintbrush, I just very lightly painted that on all of the wood to give it a more rustic look. Then I'm using this mini wooden candlestick. This did come in a pack of 5, also from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut to stain this piece. Again, I love using a small brush to apply the wood tint before I just wipe all the excess off. I think it gets in the grooves of the wood so much better by doing it this way. Next, I'm using some hot glue on the very top of my wooden candlestick and attaching my wood block right in the center of that. Then for the very last step, I'm using some of this peachy pink colored ribbon from Dollar Tree. I'm creating a really simple bow, and then I'm cutting the ends of that bow just off straight. And then I'm hot gluing that right at the very top of my candlestick underneath my wood block. This is what my piece looks like all finished. I think this would look perfect on a tiered tray, and it was super simple to create. For the first DIY, I'm going to be using 2 of these white picket fences. These did come in a pack from Hobby Lobby, and I did want them to look a little bit more full for the fence that I'm going to be using, so I'm just attaching the 2 together like you can see here. And to attach them, I just placed hot glue on the bottom one and then placed the top one on top of it. And as you can see, I ended up with a nice thick fence. I'm going to be using this scrap piece of wood that I had in my craft stash. This is about 11 inches long, and I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut, and I'm just painting it on, and then I'm wiping away the excess stain or wood tint with an old rag. I continued to do this until I had my entire piece of wood all stained. For this project, I'm also using these 2 wooden candle caps. That's what they are labeled as online, and they are from Hobby Lobby, but I'm going to be turning them into mini flower pots. I did want them to have a stained look, so I'm using that same folk art wood tint in walnut, just painting that stain on and then wiping away the excess. And of course, I did that for both of the wood candle caps. Once the stain was all dry, I thought it would be really cute to add a pop of color to the very tops of all of these pieces, or the 2 pieces. So I'm using my folk art chalk paint in the color Glacier, and I'm just painting that top edge on both of these wood caps. Then it was time to start filling my pots, so I used some hot glue inside of the pots, and then I placed some of the Spanish moss from Dollar Tree in, and I used a paintbrush to push in the Spanish moss. And I know it looks really messy right now, but I did end up going back and just trimming up that Spanish moss a little bit so that it was a lot shorter. Then for the flowers that I'm going to use in my pots, it's these really tiny pink ones from Joann Fabrics, and then I just cut down the flowers individually so that they were easier to add in my pots. And then to keep them in place, I used some hot glue, and then I just pressed them down into the moss. And then I did want to add a little bit of green to add a pop of color to these, so I just used some of the green stems that I had in my craft stash. I cut them down really small, and then I added them using some hot glue around all of the pink flowers. And again, I did this for both of my pots. Another piece I'm going to be using for this project is this wooden bicycle. This one I did get from Joann Fabrics, and I'm going to be painting it a few different colors. For the actual bike color, I'm using my Glacier chalk paint from Folk Art. And then for the handlebars, the seat, the pedals, and then the tires of the bike, I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. Another detail piece I'm going to be adding are these wood letter beads, and I'm just stringing them onto a piece of jute. And the ones I'm using spell out the word spring, but I know spring is about over and it's summertime, so if you guys wanted to use the word summer, you definitely could do that as well. Now it's time to finally start putting everything together. I'm taking a small piece of jute and I'm wrapping it around one of my pots and then just securing it with 2 knots on the back side. Then I'm going to be taking the 2 ends of the jute, and on the left side of my fence in between the slats, you can see that there's a little bit of space. I'm placing the pieces of jute in between the slats, and then on the back side, I'm just tying the jute in a double knot to make sure that it stays in place. And of course, I did that for my second pot as well. The same steps, just took the piece of jute, tied it around the pot, and then I took the ends of the jute through the slats of the fence and secured it with 2 knots on the back side. Next, I'm taking my piece of jute that has the spring wood beads on them, and I'm just getting it centered on the top of my fence, and then I'm wrapping those pieces of jute around the back side of the fence, and then just using some hot glue to secure that jute, and then just cutting the jute down a little bit so I don't have any really long loose ends. Then I'm going to be attaching my bicycle. I just placed hot glue on the back side of the bike, and then I placed it right underneath my woodward spring, and then just made sure I held that in place until the glue was all set. And then I'm hot gluing the fence piece right onto that scrap piece of wood that I stained. And I did just use hot glue, and I made sure to hold the piece in place until the glue was set. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. I love how this one turned out. It's perfect for a tabletop or even a shelf. And if you wanted to, you could always switch out the word spring for summer, since summer is right around the corner. Now moving right along into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this wooden vase, I want to call it. This is from Dollar Tree. The first thing I did was just remove the tag from the bottom, and then I'm also going to be using some of these wooden sticks. These are from Hobby Lobby. I got them back, I think, on clearance around Christmas time. But if you don't have anything like this, you could always get stems from outside as well, and then you don't even have to spend any money. So the first thing I'm doing is just taking some hot glue, and I'm putting the glue right on the sticks here, and then I'm placing it onto the wood vase, and I just continued to do that over and over until I had the entire vase covered with all of my sticks. Next, I'm adding some nautical rope at the very top of this vase. I just placed the hot glue on the vase and then pressed down the rope, and I did that all the way around the entire top. And then once I got around back to the beginning, I just cut that rope and then secured the ends down with hot glue. I really wanted to add some color to this piece, so I thought it would be great to add some of this reindeer moss from Dollar Tree. I love using the reindeer moss for spring and summer projects. So what I ended up doing was, in all of the spaces that were pretty large between the sticks around the vase, I just placed hot glue in between the space, and then I pressed the reindeer moss into that space, and I used the end of a paintbrush so that I didn't burn my fingers off. And I continued to do that until all of the spaces around my vase were covered in that reindeer moss. Once I had all of the reindeer moss added, this is what the vase is looking like so far. And the next thing I'm doing is adding a piece of floral foam inside of the vase, and then I'm using some of these succulents that I have in my stash. This one I think is from Dollar Tree, and then the other small one I'm using, I believe, is one from Amazon. And then I'm just placing some Spanish moss around the succulent, and then, like I said, I did end up adding a smaller one, and that one I think is from Amazon. Then for the very last detail that I'm adding to this piece, I'm using a few strands of raffia, and I'm wrapping it around the center of the vase, and then just tying a really small bow. To make sure that the bow doesn't move around, I am using a tiny bit of hot glue underneath the bow. And this is what my piece is looking like all finished. I love this one as well. It took me only a few minutes to create it, and it just screams spring and summer to me. Now for DIY number 3. For this project, I'm using a 7-inch wooden plaque. This one I did pick up from Joann Fabrics, but they have these at many craft stores. The first thing I'm doing is painting the entire plaque with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I only had to do 1 coat of paint for this. Then once that paint was dry, I took my Java color chalk paint from Folk Art, and I very lightly painted that around the top edge of this piece and then on the bottom edges as well. As you can see, it really made those edges pop, and you could see them a lot better. And it did add a little bit of a rustic look to this piece. I did take a little bit of paint that was left over on the brush, and I painted it on the very top surface of the plaque as well. Now I'm going to be adding some of these mixed grass picks. These are from Hobby Lobby, and I got them over in the wedding section at Hobby Lobby. And I just took a little bit of them, and then I'm just hot gluing them right in the center of my plaque. And I did add a little bit of these grass picks at a time, and I had them kind of feathered out a little bit as well. And then I'm going to be using some of these purple flowers. These ones are from Joann Fabrics. I thought this color would really pop right in the center. I took about 2 of them, and I did cut down the ugly stem that was on the bottom of them, and then I hot glued them right in the center over top of those grass picks. Next, I'm adding some jute to the very center of this plaque. I thought I would add such a cute detail. So with the jute, I wrapped it around the center, but over top of the front of the flowers, I kind of crisscrossed the jute a little bit, and then I tied the jute off on the back side of the plaque to hold it into place. Then to add some more detail on the front, I took another piece of jute, I created a really small bow, and then I'm hot gluing that bow right over the center of the flowers on the front. And then I did want to add a small hanger to this piece, so I took 2 strands of jute and then I tied a knot on both ends of that piece of jute, and then I just hot glued those on the back side of my plaque. You could always use a staple gun to hold that into place as well, which I will probably end up adding later on. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. A super simple spring and summer project that I think looks absolutely beautiful. And now for the fourth and final DIY for today. For this one, I'm using this 8x10 unfinished wood frame piece. This is from Hobby Lobby, and the first thing I'm doing to it is painting all of the outside edges of the frame with my folk art chalk paint in the color Castle. Then I remembered that I wanted to have what looks like raised beads around the edge, so I'm going to be using these little bead stickers. These are from Dollar Tree, and I could have saved myself a coat of paint by putting these little stickers on around the outside of this frame before I painted the castle color on, but I completely forgot, and I've done this a few other times too. I don't know why I always forget, but I ended up placing all of those little bead stickers around all of the edges of my frame, and then I just painted over it again with 2 coats of my castle color chalk paint. Then for the inside of the frame, I'm painting all of it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Then to add a little bit of distressing and to really make those beads pop around the edge, I'm using that same plaster color chalk paint, and I'm just running a little bit of paint over top of those and then also around all of the edges of the frame as well. To create my design on the inside of the frame, I'm going to be using this Sweet Springtime stencil from Amazon, and I will have it linked down in the description box. It was a little too large to place right in the center, so I did have to cut the edges down just a little bit to make the stencil fit inside. And then once I got it all centered and placed where I wanted it to be, I used some painter's tape at the top of the stencil and also the bottom of the stencil to hold it into place. Then for the paint color that I'm using on the stems of the flowers there on the left-hand side, I'm using the folk art chalk paint in the color Spanish Moss. Then I painted 2 of the butterflies that are on the stencil with a vintage Victorian color from folk art, but I end up painting over those later on. And then this more paint color that I'm using on the flowers here, and this one is called Wild Rose from folk art. And then for all of my lettering for the Sweet Springtime word, I'm using the Castle Color chalk paint from folk art once again. After the paint was all dry, I then removed the stencil, and because I don't want the butterflies on this piece anymore, I just used my plaster color chalk paint from Waverly to paint right back over those butterflies, and instead I'm going to be using some of these little wooden birds that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I believe it was either last year or the year before, but I still had them in my craft stash, and I'm using my Glacier color chalk paint from folk art for both of my birds. Next, I wanted to add a little bit more detail to the inside of this frame, so I'm using some hot glue to attach some of this jute around all of the inside edges of my frame. I then attached my 2 birds using some hot glue. The first bird I'm attaching here I did on the left-hand side over by my flowers, and then the second bird I did in the opposite direction in between my words sweet and springtime. Then I wanted to add some more detail, so I'm taking 2 pieces of jute and I'm making a really small, simple bow. Then I'm also going to be using a burlap flower from, I believe, a sticker pack that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I'm removing the button that's in the center of the flower, and then I'm hot gluing that flower in the top right-hand corner of my sign. I'm then hot gluing my bow that I made in the center of that flower, and then in the center of my bow, I'm placing that button back on. And this is what my sign looks like all finished. Another really easy and affordable project. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be starting out with a scrap piece of wood that I had in my stash, and this one measures at 7¼ inch by 1½ inch. And the first thing I did to this piece of wood was just painted it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I'm also going to be using 6 of these unfinished wood eggs, and these are from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be painting each one of the eggs a different color. This first one here I'm painting with my Folk Art matte acrylic paint in the color Pink or Wild Rose, and then I'm going to be painting this next one that's like a teal color, and this one is also from Folk Art in the color Cascade. Then I'm going to be painting this yellow one in the color Summer Porch. This next one I'm going to be painting more of like a green color, and it's called Sage Shadow, also from Folk Art. And then this next gray color one is in French Linen from Folk Art. And then finally, the last one that I'm painting is a light pink in the color Vintage Victorian, also from Folk Art. Then I'm going to be using some of these unfinished wood letters that spell out the word Easter. I believe these ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be painting each letter with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. Next, I'm taking some of this polka dot ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and I'm wrapping it around the front of my wood piece, and then I'm just cutting that down to size and then gluing the ends of that ribbon along the back side. I'm then gonna start placing all of my eggs on the front of my wood piece right over top of my ribbon, and once I have them all placed where I want them to be, I start gluing each one of the eggs down. After I had all of my eggs glued down, then I started gluing down all of my letters that spell out Easter, and I'm just gluing those right in the center of each one of my eggs. You could leave the project just like this if you wanted to have a simple look, but I did want to add some detail, so I hot glued Spanish moss all the way around the bottom edges of all of my eggs, and then it did look really messy, but after I had the moss all glued on, I just took my scissors and trimmed it down quite a bit, and then I started adding tiny little flowers in between all of the eggs along the bottom over top of my moss. The really tiny white flowers are from Hobby Lobby, and I did have to cut them down off of their stems, and then the little pink ones that I'm using are from Joann Fabrics, and I also cut those down quite a bit so that it was just like the top of the flower. Originally, I was going to do a white flower, then pink, then white, then pink, but then I ended up just adding the pink underneath all of the white flowers, and I love the way that that looked together. This is what my piece looks like all finished, and I think it turned out so cute. It was really fun to create, and I love all of the little details on it. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm starting out with 3 of the unfinished wood planks from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I did was just use an old towel to apply my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut. I thought it would be really cute to frame those wood pieces with some of this wood trim that I picked up from Home Depot, and it does come in a really long piece, and I just cut them down so that it would frame the 3 wood planks. And then I ended up painting each one of these with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Once everything was dry, I then started to assemble everything together. I have my 3 wood pieces pressed together, and then I did start gluing on my trim. I hot glued this top wood trim piece, and then I remembered that I wanted to add some popsicle sticks along the back of the 3 wood planks, so I ended up stopping before I started gluing the rest of the trim on, and I just very quickly put 2 popsicle sticks along the back side of all 3 of those planks, just so that it was a little bit more secure and held together. So once I had the popsicle sticks on, I then continued to hot glue all of the trim pieces around the edges of my planks. Then to add a little bit of distressing to the trim and really make the detail on those pop, I used some of my Java Color chalk paint from Folk Art, and I very lightly dry brushed this color over top, and I just love the way that it made all of that detail pop on that trim. The focal point of this project is going to be this bunny head that I got from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting it with the Waverly paint in the color Ivory, and I did just 1 quick coat of this paint. Then once that paint was all dry, I wanted to add some detail. So I took some hot glue and drew a line with it right underneath the bunny's ears. And then I added some Spanish moss. And then I just trimmed the moss down a little bit so that it wasn't so messy. And then I thought it would be so cute to add these little pink flowers from Joann Fabrics along the Spanish moss. So I'm just cutting the flowers down pretty much as small as they can possibly get. And then I'm hot gluing them going all the way across that Spanish moss. Next, I took 2 pieces of jute and I'm going to be tying them together in a bow. I'm then hot gluing that bow on the left bunny ear right above all of the flowers. Next, it was time for me to add a bunny face. So for my eyes, I am going to be painting on closed bunny eyes. I've seen this design on a lot of different like holiday Easter decor and I think it is so cute. So here I'm just hand painting on my eyes with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. My eyes are not perfect because I am pretty bad at hand painting, but I did the best that I could. And then I'm going to be using this pink button from Dollar Tree and I just hot glued that underneath my eyes for the nose. And then for the mouth of my bunny, I'm also going to be hand painting that on. And I just used that same rich black chalk paint and I painted on pretty much like a W shape underneath the nose. Another piece I'm going to be using on this project today is this Happy Easter woodward cutout. This one is from Hobby Lobby and the color that I'm painting it today is the Wild Rose color from Folk Art. Once this piece has dried, I'm then going to start piecing everything together. I placed my bunny head on the lower portion inside of my frame and then the Happy Easter woodward cutout right above the bunny's head. And to attach them, I just used some hot glue on the back side. For the very last step in this project, I'm going to be adding a hanger and I'm just using some of this pink string that I picked up from Hobby Lobby around Valentine's Day. And I just made knots on each end of the string and then I hot glued those on the back side of my frame. And this is what my piece looks like all finished. I really love the rustic elements of this one and I think it just goes perfect with pretty much any Easter decor. And now for DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be using a 6-inch wreath ring, and this is from the Woodpile brand at Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm doing to it is just painting the entire thing with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I'm then going to be adding some of these wood pieces onto the very front of my wreath ring. These wood pieces I did also pick up from Hobby Lobby and I'm not really sure what they're called, but they look kind of like wooden caps. And I'm just going to be using some hot glue to attach them and I am using 25 of them today. I am going to have a small space at the very top of my wreath ring that does not have these little wood pieces, but that's because I'm going to be adding something else to that space later on, so I want to have that space open. Once I have all 25 of them added, I'm then going back in with my Waverly paint in Ivory and I'm just painting all of the wooden caps this same color. You could always just put your wood caps on and then paint everything in the ivory color, but I always like to do things the hard way. After that ivory color has completely dried, I'm then going to be distressing all of the wood caps a little bit and I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Java to do that. I just put a little bit of paint on my brush and then wiped off the excess, and then whatever was left on the brush after that, I just painted over top of all of the caps. I'm going to be using this bunny ears piece from Hobby Lobby. It did have these flowers on the front, but I pulled those off, and then also the wire on the bottom of it, I just wiggled back and forth a few times and popped that right off. And then for the ears, I'm just going to be hot gluing those on in the space that does not have those wooden caps. I just placed a really good amount of hot glue on and then just held the bunny ears into place until they were all set. And then I added some Spanish moss in that open space. And then the flowers that came on the bunny ears piece, I just took those apart because I wanted to glue individual pieces on so that I could get them placed exactly where I wanted them to be without them looking too bulky. I ended up using 2 of the smaller pieces on each side and then 1 smaller piece right in the center, and I think it looked way better this way than the original one that looked really bulky. Then to add some color to this piece, I'm using some of these mini pink flowers from Joann Fabrics. You guys have seen me use these in multiple projects so far this year. That's because they are my absolute favorite. I just love how really pretty and dainty they are. So what I ended up doing with these is just I pulled them apart so that they were in smaller pieces, and then I hot glued them all around the greenery on this piece. Then it was time for me to make my bow, and I'm using this really pretty pink ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I am going to be creating a double bow. I've been showing this in a lot of my videos, and I'll let you guys know how I do it one more time. I wrapped the ribbon around my pointer and my middle finger twice. I then took the end of the ribbon and I pushed that through, like where there's a V at the very bottom of your two fingers where they meet your hand. I'm then pulling that end of the ribbon through that hole, and then I'm taking the end of that ribbon and pulling it over and in between my pointer finger and my middle finger, and then there's a little loop at the bottom that I'm pulling the end of the ribbon back up and through, and then just pulling that end super tight. I'm then adding that bow right in the center of all of my flowers, and then I am going to be adding one very bright pink flower, and this came in a pack of flowers from I think around Valentine's Day at Hobby Lobby this year. I just took the stem of the flower off and then hot glued it right in the center of my double bow. And this is what my wreath looks like all finished. I think it looks so different than a lot of the things I've seen out this year, and it was super easy to create. Now for the fourth and final DIY today. For this one, I'm using 3 of these unfinished wood bunnies from Hobby Lobby. One of the bunnies has ears that stick straight up, and the other 2 bunnies have an ear that is going to either the left or right. I'm also using 3 of these tumbling tower game blocks from Dollar Tree, and the first thing that I'm doing is painting on my wood tint in the color Walnut from Folk Art. I would paint the wood tint on, and then I would wipe away the excess with a old rag, and I did this to all 3 of them. Then I'm painting all 3 of my bunnies with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. Once that paint has completely dried, I'm then taking an old candle and I'm rubbing the wax all over the front and back side of all 3 of my bunnies. This is going to give me a really chippy paint look. I've used this technique in a few of my videos and I really like how it's turned out, so I keep using this technique on other projects. Once I have all of the wax on, I'm then going to be painting all 3 of my bunnies, but all 3 of them are going to be different colors. This first one that I'm doing here is from Folk Art, and it's in the color Glacier. And then I'm going to be painting this second one here with the color Summer Porch, and this one is also from Folk Art. And then for the very last one, I did paint that in the color Vintage Victorian, also from Folk Art. So once I have them painted and the paint's all dry, I'm then placing a duct tape over all of the bunnies, making sure I rub it on very well, and then I'm just peeling back the tape, and it is now going to take off all of that top layer of paint that had the wax underneath of it. And I continue to do this step for all 3 of my bunnies, and this is just such a super easy way to give a chippy look on projects that are a little bit smaller. I know a lot of people use Vaseline. That is a good way to do it as well, but I really like this wax and tape method. You can see here that I'm adding some jute around the neck of my bunny, and I'm tying a really small bow. I did do this on all 3 of my bunnies, and then to keep the jute bow into place, I did add a little bit of hot glue right underneath of it. For the bunny that I painted yellow, and it does have the ear where it is going to the right side, I added a little bit of Spanish moss right where the ear meets the top of the bunny's head. And then I'm going to be adding some of these really cute purple flowers. This flower set came from Joann Fabrics, and I did just cut really tiny pieces of the flower, and then I'm just hot gluing those on top of the Spanish moss. And then I am adding one of these tiny white flowers that came from a stem that I had from Hobby Lobby, and I just love those two colors paired together. I did the same thing for the blue bunny where it has the ear going to the left side. I added the Spanish moss and then a little bit of the purple flowers, and then again one of the white flowers. And then you probably guessed it, for the pink bunny where it has the double ears sticking straight up, I did kind of like a headband. I did the Spanish moss going across both of the ears, and then I did purple flowers on each side, and then one white flower right in the center. For the last step, I'm adding some hot glue in the center of my Tumbling Tower game blocks, and I'm just hot gluing all 3 bunnies on all 3 blocks. And this is what the bunnies look like all finished. A really easy, affordable project for Easter this year. Now for DIY number 2, I'll be making fabric carrots. For these, I used cream color fabric from Hobby Lobby, also striped fabric from Hobby Lobby, greenery stems from Hobby Lobby, lilac stems also from Hobby Lobby, polyfill stuffing, scissors, jute, and my hot glue gun. I first started by measuring and cutting out all of my fabric into squares, and I did do a few different sizes because I wanted a few different size carrots. I did 9" by 9", 7" by 7", and 5" by 5". Once I have all of my fabric cut, I'm then folding my squares in half, and now I'm going to be making my carrot shape. So I'm going to be cutting my folded square in a diagonal. I've opened up my fabric to this triangle shape, and now I'm placing hot glue right on one side of that fabric and then just folding it in half once again to attach the other side of the fabric together to form a seam. Now you could always stitch this together or use fabric glue, but I'm just using my trusty old hot glue gun. Once all of that glue has dried, I'm then flipping this fabric piece inside out, and to help me out a little bit, since there is a point to this, I'm using an end of a paintbrush or one of those little dowel rods, and it really helped me be able to get the point all flipped out. Next, I'm using this polyfill to fill my fabric and form my carrot. You can get polyfill at any local craft store or Walmart, Amazon, but I'm not going to be filling my fabric carrot all the way to the top. I'm going to be leaving a little bit of that fabric open. Next, I'm taking a piece of jute and I'm tying a knot around the very top, leaving about 1 inch or so of that fabric showing. And I'm not tying that jute completely tight because I'm going to be adding some of these greenery leaves and grass from those stems that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. After I have all the greenery added to the very top of my carrot, I'm then just tying that jute really tight and then cutting off the long ends. Here are my fabric carrots all finished. They were so affordable and easy to make. I did multiple sizes in these, again the 9 by 9, 7 by 7, and 5 by 5, and for the striped ones I did vertical stripes and also horizontal stripes. Moving into DIY number 3, I'll be making standing decorative eggs. For this project, I used a pack of these wooden eggs from Hobby Lobby, Waverly chalk paint and plaster, Folk Art chalk paint and Java, paintbrushes, burlap fabric from Hobby Lobby, raffia, jute, scissors, lace ribbon from Dollar Tree, buffalo check ribbon from Hobby Lobby, buttons from Dollar Tree, and my hot glue gun. I started by painting both of these wooden eggs with my chalk paint in the color plaster. I did have to do 2 coats of this paint to get all of that wood color covered up, and then I also painted the very bottom part of the egg as well. To give both of the eggs a rustic farmhouse look, I dry brushed my Java colored chalk paint over top of both eggs and then just dabbed that color over the eggs as well. For the first egg, I'm cutting a piece of burlap fabric about 1 inch thick, and then cutting that down to size around the center of my egg. After I have my fabric all cut down, I'm then hot gluing both ends of my burlap fabric around the back side of my egg. Next, I'm measuring and cutting down to size this lace ribbon to go around the very center of my egg, just like the burlap fabric. I'm then hot gluing this lace ribbon right over top of the burlap fabric. Then for the piece of jute, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm wrapping it around the center of my egg and then cutting it down to size, and then just hot gluing it right over top of that burlap and lace fabric. For the finishing touches on this egg, I'm hot gluing 3 buttons on the front right over top of the fabric and jute. I'm doing a darker colored button that's a little bit larger in the center, and then I'm doing 2 smaller cream color buttons on the sides of the larger button. For the second egg, I'm attaching some of this buffalo check ribbon to the very bottom of the egg with some hot glue. I'm then wrapping the ribbon around the top of the egg and bringing the other end of that ribbon and just attaching it on the bottom as well. I'm then taking 2 more pieces of this buffalo check ribbon and continuing that same step, leaving a small space in between the ribbon. And for the last step on this egg, I'm using a few strands of raffia, and to attach them, I used some hot glue along the back side of the egg, and then on the front side of the egg, I'm tying a really simple bow and then just cutting off the extra long ends of the raffia. To make sure my bow stays in place, I'm using some hot glue right underneath it. Once again, these eggs were so easy and affordable to make and hardly took me any time at all to create them. For DIY number 1, I'm making a moss topiary, and for this one I'm using a 3-inch terracotta pot from Dollar Tree, and I started by painting that with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I painted the entire pot this color and I only did 1 coat of paint. Once that paint was dry, I then took some sandpaper and I just started roughing up that paint a little bit to give me a nice distressed look. Once I had my pot all finished, I then moved on and started attaching this reindeer moss from Dollar Tree to a 3-inch foam ball. To attach the moss, I used some hot glue. I just placed the glue right onto the foam ball and then pressed the moss on top of that to attach it. And I continued this step over and over again until I had my ball completely covered in the moss. It does look really messy, but I did end up using my scissors to trim down that reindeer moss and give my ball its shape back. Next, I'm taking this dowel rod and I'm pressing it into the bottom of my moss ball. Once I had it in my ball, I decided I wanted it to have a stained look. So I then used my Craftsmart wood stain on an old rag and I just applied that to the entire dowel rod. Now I'm wrapping some of this Easter themed berry garland around my entire ball. I just randomly wrapped it around in different places until I thought it looked good. Once I had it all the way wrapped around, I just cut off the end, and then that end wire piece, I just looped through another one of the wire pieces that was already on the ball just to hold everything into place. I did pick this garland up at Hobby Lobby. It was $2.99 and then I think it was like 40% off of that. Next, I'm cutting down some of this floral foam that I picked up from Dollar Tree. I did have to cut it down into a few different pieces to get it to fit exactly the way I wanted it to into the bottom of my pot. I then placed my dowel rod right in the center of that floral foam, and I thought it would be really cute to add some Spanish moss to the very top of my pot. And I just attached it using some hot glue, put the hot glue at the very top of the floral foam and then pressed the moss on top of that. And I did give it a little bit of a trim as well. For the last step in this project, I'm adding some jute on the underneath lip of the top of my pot. I wrapped the jute around a few times, I would probably say like 4 or 5 times, and then I cut off the end and hot glued that to secure it. And this is my moss topiary all finished. I think it turned out super cute. It was a really easy and affordable project, and I really love the pastel colors of this berry garland. Now for DIY number 2, I'm making a Hello Easter sign. For this one, I'm using 3 of these unfinished oval wood shapes. These ones were 4 3/4 by 7 inches, and I did pick them up at Michael's. 2 of them I'm painting with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I only did 1 coat of paint on 2 of them, and I did paint around all of the edges of them as well. Then for the 3rd oval shape, I'm painting that one with my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Sage. I love this color so much. It is great for Easter, or I guess pretty much any time, but I really love it for Easter. I painted a 1 coat on this one as well, and all 3 of the oval shapes were 99 cents a piece. After the paint was all dry, I'm then taking my folk art chalk paint in the color Castle on a small fluffy brush, and I'm dry brushing that onto both of the oval shapes that I have painted the ivory color. You can't really see it here, but this is giving it a more like distressed, rustic look. My lighting was a little bit too bright here, so sorry about that. And then for the sage color oval, I'm dry brushing that with the ivory color. It's now time to assemble everything together. I'm taking the sage colored oval and I'm placing hot glue on the back side of it, and then I'm pressing that one onto the two ivory colored ovals. In this project, I'm also using this unfinished wood word cutout that says hello, and I'm painting it with my Waverly paint in the color ivory. I did pick this one up from Hobby Lobby, and it came in a pack of a bunch of different words, and some of them were hello, family, grateful, blessed, and a couple other ones as well. And then I'm using these individual wood letters. These ones I think are either from Hobby Lobby or Michaels. They were just in a stash with a bunch of wood letters that I had, and I'm spelling out the word Easter, and I'm also painting them all with the Waverly paint in ivory. Once the paint was all dry, I'm then using hot glue on the back of my wood hello word, and then just placing that right in the center of my sage oval. And then before I hot glue my letters that say Easter, I did put them below the word hello, and I just wanted to have them all spaced out before I started gluing them down, because once you glue it down, it's really hard to get it off if you're not, or if you don't have them spaced exactly the way you want them to. So I always like to set the individual letters down first before hot gluing them on. Now I'm using this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I'm cutting it down so that the edges of the ribbon will go along the oval shape. And then once I have the two edges cut of the ribbon, I'm also cutting the ribbon to be a little bit thinner as well. I'm then attaching that piece of ribbon right underneath my word Easter using some hot glue. For this project, I thought it would be really cute to add some of these spring florals that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I really loved the green color on these and how cute the little white flower is. But before I started attaching them, I had to cut them down just a little bit so that it would be easier to place onto my sign. I'm attaching the little flowers right over top of the burlap, and I used hot glue on the stem of each flower and then just pressed that down onto the burlap. I did have to hold each flower down until the glue was completely set to make sure that they stayed in place. After I had all of my flowers attached, I decided to add some Spanish moss to all of the stems of my flowers, and I used hot glue to attach it, and I thought it just added a really cute touch to my sign. And then to add one more little detail, I decided to add a small bow at the very top of the sign right above the word hello, and I used this really cute striped ribbon from Dollar Tree. I just made a little bow, and then for the tail ends of the ribbon, I just cut those in a diagonal shape and then hot glued that bow right on the top of my sign. To create the hanger for my sign, I'm using some nautical rope. I just measured that to the length that I wanted my hanger to be, cut that down to size with the world's dullest scissors. Since this video, I have purchased a good pair of scissors, but these ones had definitely seen better days, so it took me forever to get through this rope. But once I had it all cut, I then flipped my sign over, and to attach the rope, I used my staple gun. And here is my Hello Easter sign all finished. I ended up putting mine in the center of a wreath. I love all of the neutral colors on this. It can go with pretty much any decor. For DIY number 3, I'm making hop blocks, and for this one I'm using 3 different size and shaped blocks. These did come in a unfinished like wood block pack from Hobby Lobby, and I just picked out 3 of them that I thought would be good. And I'm painting all of them with my folk art chalk paint in the color Sage. You guys know I love this color so much, and I only did 1 coat of paint on all of the blocks. Once those were sitting and drying, I'm using the letter H and P. These letters I believe are from Hobby Lobby. Again, I just picked them out of my pack of letters that I have just randomly in my craft stash, and I'm painting that with the Waverly paint in the color Ivory, both for the letter H and P. Next, I'm using this Easter themed berry garland that I picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I'm wrapping it around 2 of my fingers about 3 or 4 times to form a wreath. This is going to be the O for my word hop. I'm then placing hot glue along the back side of the wreath and then putting that in the center of the block that I'm using for the middle. I'm then attaching my letter H to the front of one of my blocks and then attaching the letter P to the front of one of my blocks. Next, I'm using this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I'm cutting it a few inches in length, and then I'm cutting that strip in the shape of a bunny ear. After I had my first ear cut out, I then needed to cut out a second ear. So I did the same thing, just cut a few inches of a burlap, but now I was able to use my first ear as a guide to help me cut out my second ear so that both of them would be the same size. To add some detail to my ears, I'm using some of this white trim that has like these little pom-poms on them, and I'm hot gluing that around all of the edges of both of my ears. I did pick this up at the Target dollar spot last year around Valentine's Day, but I know that a lot of craft stores have trim and ribbon very similar to this one. For the very last step for this project, I'm just using some hot glue on the bottom sides of both of my ears and then hot gluing those on the very top of my block that has the letter H on it. And here are my hot blocks all finished. This project only took me a few minutes to create. I think it turned out super cute and it's perfect for any tabletop or shelf decor. Now for the fourth and final DIY today, I'm making potted bunny ears. For this one, I'm using a 3-inch terracotta pot from Dollar Tree and I'm painting it with the Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I did paint my entire pot this color. Once the ivory color was dry, I'm then taking my folk art chalk paint in the color Castle on a small fluffy brush and I'm dry brushing that color on my entire pot, and I'm going all in the same direction to give it a rustic look. Next, I'm cutting down some of this floral foam from Dollar Tree. I did have to cut it down a few different times so that it was the right size to place into my pot. I'm also using some of these bunny ears napkin holder from Hobby Lobby, and it did have a tag attached to the back, and I was able to just tear that off really slowly and it was fine. It didn't damage the ears. And then I didn't want to have it completely in a circle, so I just used some scissors to cut the very bottom of the napkin holder, and then I placed that into my pot around my floral foam. For this project, I'm using some boxwood stems from Walmart. This whole bundle, I believe, was only $1.47, which is a great price, and I cut them down quite a bit so that I could place them around my bunny ears without them being too overpowering. And I just placed some hot glue right onto the floral foam and then pressed the boxwood stem on top of that to hold them into place. I continued this step until I had the boxwoods around the entire floral pot, going all the way around all of my bunny ears. Next, I'm using some of these mini eggs. They did come on a floral pick from Michaels. They are $1.99, and then I got 40% off of that pick, so really inexpensive. I just cut the little eggs off of the stem and then placed those into my floral pot around all of the boxwood stems. And for the eggs that didn't have an actual stem left on it to place into the floral foam, I just hot glued those right onto the boxwoods. To add just a little bit more detail to my pot, I'm using some of this jute ribbon from Dollar Tree. I'm measuring it around the bottom portion of my pot and then just cutting that down to size and hot gluing it around my pot. And here are my potted bunny ears all finished. Again, such an easy project that goes with pretty much any kind of decor. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using this square framed sign from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm going to be doing to it is just flipping it over and taking out the square insert from the inside. Then I'm going to be painting the entire outside of the frame with my Java colored chalk paint from Folk Art. And then once that's all dry, I'm going to be taking my plaster chalk paint from Waverly on a Dollar Tree stencil brush, and I'm just painting that randomly over top of that Java color to give it a more distressed look. And then pulling off the beads that were on the top of this piece. I'm going to be saving those for another project, but for this one, I'm not going to be using them. Then I'm using this wood piece. This did come in a pack from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting the front of it with my Waverly paint in the color Plaster. Once that's all painted, I'm going to start putting everything back together. I did put the piece that I took out in the beginning back into the frame. And then I'm using 3 of the tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, and I'm hot gluing those right in the center of this piece. I'm then placing hot glue on all 3 of those blocks to attach my square piece that I painted with that plaster color. I thought it would be really cute to add some of these letter wooden beads to spell out the word spring. So I'm just stringing these onto a piece of jute, and then to hold all of my beads in place, I did do a double knot next to the letter S at the beginning, and then next to the letter G, I did a double knot also just to hold those beads into place so that they don't move around. Next, I'm taking those wood letter beads, and I do want to have them attached at the very top of this piece, kind of like strung around each side. But since I had already attached that wood piece in the middle, I did have to go back and take out those pieces from the frame just so that I could string it a little bit better. So I just got those all centered, and then for the ends of the jute, I just hot glued those down on the back side of my square wood piece. Then I just put everything back together into the frame. I'm then going to be adding some really cute flowers. I'm using these natural picks from Hobby Lobby. These can be found in like the wedding section at Hobby Lobby. And I did take one of them out, and I just kind of shredded it up a little bit because I did want to use each one of these pieces individually and then just have them placed where I want them to be. I'm also using some of these pretty purple flowers from Joann Fabrics. And like I said, I'm just wanting to place them on individually so that I can really get the look that I want. So I'm just hot gluing them starting on the left side, as you can see me doing here. I did the natural picks on the bottom, and then I put the purple flower on the very top. And I am doing this for 4 of them going across. So once I had all of them placed where I wanted them to be and all hot glued, I did want to add a little bit of detail. So I'm using 1 strand of raffia for each one of my little flowers that I have. And I just made a really tiny bow, and then I hot glued that right on the top of all of my little flowers. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. It's such a simple, beautiful home decor piece, and it goes with so many different types and styles of decor. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this wooden cube from Dollar Tree, and I'm just painting the entire thing with the Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And then I'm also going to be using 2 of these wooden paint sticks. These are either from Lowe's or Home Depot, and I'm also painting both of these with that plaster color paint. And I did lose the clip where I hot glued the 2 paint sticks together, but as you can see here, I just glued them together. I'm then going to be attaching these 2 paint sticks on the inside of my cube piece. I just used hot glue on the inside center and then just attached the 2 paint sticks. I did want this piece to have a little bit of a rustic feel to it, so I used some of my Java color chalk paint on a paintbrush, and I just very lightly dry brushed it all over this entire piece, like I said, just to give it more of a rustic look. Next, I'm using one of these wooden planks from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting on my wood tent from Folk Art in the color Walnut. Once it was all painted on, I just used an old rag to wipe away the excess wood tint, and then I'm going to be using a stencil that I picked up from Amazon. I am only going to be using the top of the stencil that says Fresh Cut Flowers. I'm just getting those words all centered on my wood plank, and then I'm using my Waverly paint and plaster to stencil on those words. Once the paint has dried, I'm then removing the stencil. Next, I'm taking a piece of jute and I'm stringing the jute around the handle of this mini watering can. This watering can did come from Hobby Lobby a few years ago that I had gotten on clearance. I'm just kind of seeing how long I want my strand of jute to be, because I am, like you can see here, hot gluing the jute at the very top of my paint sticks. And then I'm going to be using some more hot glue to attach my wooden plank that I had stenciled the Fresh Cut Flowers words onto. And then to fill the cube, I used a piece of paper towel to put in there first because I did not have a ton of Spanish moss left over, but I put the Spanish moss on top of the paper towel, and then I used some of these really pretty pink flowers. These ones are from Joann Fabrics. I just pinched them off to be a little bit smaller, placed them inside of the Spanish moss, and then also some of these little white flowers from Hobby Lobby I placed all around the pink ones. Then to add some detail around the center of my cube, I'm using some of this green and cream checked ribbon. This is from Joann Fabrics. I measured it to the length that I need it to be to go around the center of the cube, and then I just hot glued the ends of that around the back side. For the last step in this project, I made a double jute bow, or I took 2 strands of jute, created a bow, and then for the tail ends of the bow, I just cut those down a little bit, and then I hot glued that bow right in the center of that checked ribbon on the front of my cube. This is what the piece looks like all finished. It was another really simple spring project that is perfect to add to any tabletop decor this spring. Moving right along into DIY number 3, for this one I'm using a 4-inch grapevine wreath and then some of these pink and purple flowers that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. The grapevine wreath I think is from Michaels. As you can see here, I've already taken apart some of the flowers. These ones are super easy to take apart. I just pulled them off, and then if I needed them to be a little bit shorter, I would just use my scissors to cut them down. But I am doing them in sections. You saw me hot gluing them on. I just hot glued a bunch of like the purplish blue ones down in a section, and then once I was done with that, then I started going over to the pink ones, and I would just hot glue all of the pink ones down. And I did stick them in between like some of the parts of the grapevine wreath just so that they would stay in place a little bit until the glue fully dried. So as you can see, I just rotated between the 2 colors, and then once I was done attaching all of the flowers, I then started adding some of the Spanish moss from Dollar Tree around all of the flowers on the inside of the wreath and then also on the outside of the wreath. And then in between all of the flowers too, if I had any little open spaces, I would add some of the Spanish moss. At the end, it will start to look really messy. That's because Spanish moss is really messy. But at the end, I just use my scissors to trim down that moss a little bit and make it look more neat. And this is the wreath all finished. This one was by far the easiest project in today's video. I think this one turned out perfect for spring. I just really love these 2 colors together. And now for the 4th and final DIY today. For this one, I'm using a scrap piece of wood, and this piece is 18 inches long. And I'm just using my Craftsmart wood stain once again, and I'm painting it on with a paintbrush. Once it was all painted on, I then used my old rag just to wipe away any excess that was on the wood. For this project today, I'm using these wood letters to spell out the word spring, and these ones are from Michaels. They are 2 inches by 3 inches, and I wanted them all to have a white background, so I'm painting them with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Once the paint was fully dry, I then started to attach a piece of jute to the very front center of my letter S. To attach the jute, I'm using hot glue in a few different spots to hold it into place. Next, I'm going to be adding some of these really small pink flowers from Joann Fabrics. I did cut them down super small because I'm going to be adding them one by one to the jute that I just added onto the S. To attach them, I'm using some hot glue, and I am leaving a space in between the areas where I'm adding the pink flowers because I will go back through and add some other flowers to this piece as well. For the other flowers I'm adding are these like purple flowers. These are also from Joann Fabrics. I just love having purple and pink together for spring. As you can see here, I'm cutting the purple flowers down in very tiny pieces and hot gluing them on top of the jute just like I did with the pink flowers. I continued to add the purple flowers in all of the open spaces on my letter S, and then I did the same design for my letters R and N. Then for the rest of my letters P, I, and G, I attached Spanish moss to the very front of the letters. I used hot glue on the wood part of the letters and then just pressed the Spanish moss on top. It was looking super messy, but once I had all of the moss attached, I used my scissors to just trim it down quite a bit so that it looked nice and neat. I wanted these letters to have a little bit more colors, so I added some reindeer moss right over top of the Spanish moss. I did the same thing, I just attached it with some hot glue, and then once I had it all attached, I trimmed it down a little bit so that it looked nice and neat. And again, I did this for the letters P, I, and G. Then to have these letters tie in with the letters S, R, and G, I added some of these pink and purple flowers on the top left-hand side, and I did that for the other letters that were exactly like these. Next, as you can see here, I'm just spacing all of the letters out and standing them up where I want them to be before I start attaching them. To attach each letter, I just use hot glue on the bottom side of the letter, and then I would press it down onto my stained wood piece. I continued to do this for all of the letters. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. This is the perfect tabletop shelf or mantle piece. I think it is so pretty and it was super easy to do. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using this oval shaped wood piece that has these wooden beads attached to the top of it already. I did pick this piece up from Hobby Lobby and it was really inexpensive. The first thing I'm doing to it is just painting on my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. I painted on a good amount of the wood tint and then I just used an old towel to wipe away the excess. I did want my beads to have that same look, so I did the same thing. I painted on the wood tint on all of the beads and then used my towel just to wipe away all of the excess, and I really like how it left like the unfinished wood look right in the center of each bead. In this project, I'm going to be using an unfinished wood truck. This one is from Joann Fabrics. And for the main truck color, I'm painting it with my folk art chalk paint in the color Glacier. Then, of course, I had to paint the tires, and I'm painting them with a color called Rich Black from Folk Art, but pretty much any black color will do. And of course, I did both tires with this color. And then for the bed of the truck, I'm using my Java color chalk paint from Folk Art. Then to finish up with my tires, I did use my Waverly chalk paint in the color white, and I just hand painted a circle right in the center of both of my tires. In this project, I'm also using 3 of these unfinished wood carrots. These ones are from Hobby Lobby, but they do have ones that are very similar from Dollar Tree. And I'm painting the carrot bottom portion with my Waverly paint in the color Pumpkin. And of course, I painted all 3 of the carrots that color. And then for the stems of all of my carrots, I'm using the color Spanish Moss from Folk Art. I'm going to start putting everything together, but I did need to have my truck raised a little bit from my wood oval piece. So I'm just using a really small scrap piece of wood I had in my stash, and I'm hot gluing it to the back front side of my truck just so I have a little bit of space between the wood oval piece and then the truck. Then I'm hot gluing all 3 of my carrots onto my oval piece on the left hand side. These are all going to be sitting behind the bed of my truck. To attach my truck, I'm just placing hot glue along the entire backside and then placing it where my carrots are behind the bed of it. And then for the very top of my piece, I'm going to be using these Scrabble wood letter blocks. These are from Amazon, and I will have them linked down in my description box. And I'm just spelling out the word Carrot Farm at the very top and getting the letters all spaced out the way I want them to be before I start hot gluing each one of them down. I did end up adding a little bit more detail to this piece. I used some of this white cotton cord from Hobby Lobby, and I hot glued it around all of the edges of the oval piece, and I just really love the detail that it added. I also ended up adding a little bit of Spanish moss between the bed of my truck and the carrots, and I just used hot glue to attach the Spanish moss. And then for the very last step, I ended up adding a few of these little white flowers from Hobby Lobby, and I cut them down really small, and then I also cut down the stems of the flowers, and I just added those at the very top of my piece. Here is what the piece looks like all finished. I think it turned out so cute and it was really easy to do. I ended up adding it to one of the stands that I have when you first walk in my home. Now moving right along into DIY number 2. For this project, I'm using one of these unfinished wooden cube pieces from Dollar Tree. And then the first thing I'm doing to it is painting the entire piece with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I'm also using 4 of these scrap wood pieces. These are from Hobby Lobby and they do come in a bundle all together. I already cut one end of each one of these wood pieces on an angle so that when I add like my roof part that you'll see me do later, it sits evenly. And then for all of those 4 wood pieces, I did paint those with that same plaster color paint. I'm also using these 2 unfinished wood square pieces. I believe these ones are from Amazon, but they sell ones similar to this at Dollar Tree and Michael's. And I'm just using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut. You guys know I love this tint and I use it on a lot of my projects. I'm just painting it on both of these wood pieces and then wiping away the excess with an old rag. Next, I'm gonna start assembling everything together. I'm using hot glue on one side of my wood scrap piece to attach 2 of them together. Once I have them attached together, then I'm placing hot glue inside of my cube right in the center to attach those 2 wood pieces to the side. Once I have that one attached, then I'm going to be doing the exact same thing to the other ones. I'm attaching the other 2 wood pieces together and then placing hot glue on the other side of the inside of the cube to attach those 2 wood pieces to the inside. Next, I'm adding my 2 square pieces to form my roof. I'm just using hot glue on the very tops of those wood pieces that are sticking up. I just used both of them to just kind of see how I wanted my roof to be to make sure it was in line, and then just used a pretty good amount of glue. And then once the glue was on, I just held the piece down until the glue was all set, and then I did the exact same thing to the other side. I did want to add some writing to the very front of this piece, so I'm using this Farm Fresh Organic Carrot stencil that I picked up from Amazon, and I will have it linked down below. I just placed it in the center of the front of my piece, and then I used painter's tape on the top and the bottom of the stencil to hold it into place. Then for the carrot color, I'm using Pumpkin from Waverly. Then for the stem of the carrots, I'm using the color Spanish Moss from Folk Art. And then for all of my words, the Farm Fresh Organic Carrots, I'm using Rich Black from Folk Art. Once the paint was all dry, I then removed the painter's tape and my stencil. Then I'm going to be adding some Spanish moss to the inside of my cube. I did add a piece of paper towel in there first just because I didn't have a ton of Spanish moss left over and I needed a little bit more filler. Then I'm using these really cute carrots. These ones are from Hobby Lobby and I'm just placing them inside of the Spanish moss. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. I love how this one turned out. It was really easy to do and it is the perfect piece to add to your tabletop or any tiered tray. Now for the third and final DIY for today, I'm using this wood piece that had a bunch of small wood icons in it and it was just left over in my craft stash and I thought it would be perfect for this project. The first thing I'm doing to it is painting the entire piece with the Waverly paint. You guessed it, in plaster. My favorite color, definitely from Waverly. Once it was all dry, I wanted to add a little bit of distressing to it, so I took my Java colored paint from Folk Art on a brush and I just very lightly painted that color around all of the edges of this piece. Then I'm moving on and I'm going to be using 4 of these wooden bunnies. These are from Dollar Tree and I'm painting all 4 of them with the prominent pink color from Folk Art. And then I'm also going to be using 5 of the unfinished wooden eggs. These are also from Dollar Tree. And for these ones, I painted the base color of all of the eggs with Persian gray from Folk Art, but then I knew I wanted to add some detail to the eggs and really make them look like Easter eggs. So what I ended up doing was on the top and the bottom of the egg, I added a pink stripe, and this is in the color Vintage Pink from Folk Art. And then I wanted to add some zigzag stripes, so I did 2 different zigzag stripes on all of the eggs, and that is in the color Vintage Teal. And then in between all of the zigzags, I added just some polka dots with my Waverly paint and plaster. The last piece that I'm going to be using for this project are 4 of these wooden caps from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using my folk art wood tint once again in the color walnut, and I just painted the wood tint on all 4 of the caps and then used that same old towel or rag that I have and just wiped away the excess. Next, I'm attaching all of my wood caps to the very bottom of my square wood piece. I'm just using some hot glue on the bottom side of the cap and then pressing them down on the bottom of the square piece. And then for the very last step, I'm placing all of my painted wooden bunnies and eggs inside of all of the little squares, and this is the perfect tabletop tic-tac-toe. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. I think it turned out so cute, and do different colors if you wanted so it would match with your own decor. That was it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed seeing all 44 of my spring and Easter DIYs. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing. Please be sure to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Thank you so much for watching.